right? So in the world of high tech, there's any arbitrage opportunity is being closed always, right? So whenever there's arbitrage, there's always the market forces will always close that.
In the world in general, not
Absolutely, and it's even faster in our area. And so, interestingly enough, as someone that lived through both sides, right, being in Israel, being an investor in Israel, being an investor here, why is that arbitrage not closing? Meaning there's still kind of the different valuations, different terms going on between Israel and the U.S. And what will drive closing that over time?
So first of all, I don't think that necessarily I would call it an arbitrage because it's not like it's the same thing.
And how's that different?
I think that returns in venture are very much dominated by the very, very, very big outcomes, right? Not even the $1 billion outcomes. Maybe the $5 billion, maybe the $10 billion outcomes.
Depending on the fund size.
Depending on the fund size. And the reality is that it is easier to really, truly hit it out of the ballpark. I think it is easier in Silicon Valley than anywhere else in the world, including Israel. So I don't think it's necessarily an arbitrage. I think that it's adjusted to the, because every time the evaluation of a startup, why is something that has nothing worth $10 million or $20 million? It is because there's some probability that it will be worth, $500 million. And if there is a probability that it would be worth 10 billions or 5 billions or even $1 billion, there are very few Israeli companies that so far have reached that level, then it's justified to pay more for the, even if both companies have not exactly the same right now, there's a better chance that one of them will generate it. Now, I think I don't think the gap would ever close because I think that, or at least not in the foreseeable future, because I do think that the Silicon Valley is going to maintain its position as it's probably the best place in the world for these, for creating the next Ubers or the next, Airbnbs of the world. But the way to decrease the arbitrage gap is that there would be more big successes out of Israel, and in fact I do think that this is the direction. I think that the past couple of weeks, probably the Israelis know about it because they follow the Israeli media probably more than the Americans do. But in the last week or two, there were, I think, an unprecedented rhythm of every day, like 2 or 3 either big financing or exits of Israeli high tech companies. It was really unusual. The last week or 2 weeks were just unusual, and so I think basically this is what's gonna decrease the difference between the more they look the same and the more they have similar prospects, the similar the valuations are going to be.
I think risk capital is inherently local. So first 2 companies I founded were based on the East Coast. We had fewer investors we can go after. In fact, even though we were based in the Southeast, we ended up getting a Boston-based VC and a Silicon Valley-based VC, only because they already had investments in that region. So for most investors, the opportunity cost of travel time to try and spend time with your portfolio company or connect them with your local network is so high that they tend to stay close to home. And I think the challenge is the greater the distance that you have to that nexus of what they think they can bring to bear, the more the arbitrage you're going to see in terms of cost, just because the transaction cost is higher for them.
So do you foresee that A rounds, C rounds will always stay local?
No, I think what you're going to see is exactly what's happening. You're seeing risk capital, from different sources. So, about 50% of the capital we invest at IE is invested in Israel. And, for us, the rationale is that we think there's great opportunity there that we can attract by offering a bridge to the Silicon Valley. The terms are great. We can deliver Silicon Valley style terms, some of the things you talked about in your presentation, that are more consistent with what you would expect to see here. And then I think once those companies reach a certain size, as the risk begins to decrease, as the cost of capital goes down, you've got capital that's more mobile. They're willing to invest in more places because there's more of a proof statement of about the company itself. But I do, what's happening is that, the competition in the valley has become so intense for deals where people are seeking alpha. They have to be contrarian. They have to go to other markets. And if you look at the leading indicators, if you look at what AngelList is doing, if you look at what 500 Startups is doing, a good percentage of where they're beginning to see deal flow is actually outside of the Silicon Valley.
So now there are two options. Either I become a moderator and I keep asking you questions, or we ask the crowd.
My question is a little bit different. You talk about 50% of the companies you're investing in are Israeli. How do you evaluate security risk? The situation with Iran is very serious. How does that play in how you evaluate your investments in Israel? Not just Iran, but Hezbollah and everything else that's going on.
Yeah, I mean, part of, I think, the value that we're providing is looking at Israeli tech companies that ultimately are looking to grow beyond just being in Israel. So we don't look at it as just the core risk of being an Israeli company. We look at the opportunity to help that company scale so that we can diffuse some of the risk you're talking about by having headcount in the U.S., potentially having headcount in other parts of the world. So, we don't invest in local companies. We're investing in companies we think can have a global appeal.
When,
It does not.
We don't think about it at all.
It does. When we were raising Aleph, we actually went to LPs and we were asked twice that question. And throughout talking with many LPs, we were asked twice. And the answer is generally the Iranians already have missiles to get to Israel. Why do you think they developed the next generation missiles? So it's for you. And suddenly the discussion completely changed, and so it obviously it's a global problem that is unrelated specifically to Israel about Iran. Now the sad truth in my mind, as someone that is actually living in Israel, the flip side of that pressure pot called living in Israel is, in my mind, part of the reason why it's a community only second to the Silicon Valley. In that pressure pot, the positive side of that very negative situation is, I think, much of the innovation, much of the drive, and much of the new kibbutz kind of it's us against the world mentality that drives the positive in Israel. So, two sides.
Scott, what was your experience going to Israel as an American?
It's the first time I've ever been within 200 miles of having rockets laying close to me. It was.
You went there on this late summer?
I went there for DLD a year ago, so it was just kind of at the beginning of when some of the tensions were heating up. I guess what struck me as being interesting, it struck me as being odd, is the level of how normal that was for everybody. For me, it was extraordinary. I'm texting people, freaking rocket that just landed, right here on the map. And, everybody else is just, continuing to pour their coffee, continuing to do the things they do. So it seems like the normal in Israel is just very different than it is in other places I've been. I have a development center in Odessa, Ukraine. And I see the same mentality happening in Odessa now, where the stress level in the beginning was extraordinarily high when the conflict hit, and people have reached a new norm. So now normal for them feels very tense-filled for us, but they seem to be able to cope with it, and they'll, it's an escalation of expectations. So, Israelis have been forced to deal with, a level of tension that, most people don't have to deal with. And it was striking, it's sort of like walking into a room where the music is too loud. Everybody else is accustomed to music, but, you're like this when you come in for the first time.
And did that experience help you feel more comfortable with investing in Israel?
And this may be a bit cliche, but I think it helped me understand the risk-taking attitude we see in the entrepreneurs that we invest in. The level of aggressiveness, the willingness to take risks, the willingness to burn the boats, is, I think, a lot of what you get out of a military experience. And the fact that everybody has that shared experience creates a very interesting cultural phenomenon of people that are willing to do things that appear difficult or extraordinary, from a risk perspective. So you don't see that in many other places. Here, even in the Valley, you see that in people that are younger, where there's no responsibilities. They're not worried about, kids or family or houses, they're willing to do anything at that point in time because the risk is very low. In Israelis, I see they're already advanced in their lives, but they're still willing to take that same categorical risk, which I think is fascinating.
Javi, the VP growth of Facebook, we're actually having drinks when the first rocket fired towards Tel Aviv, and it was intercepted. And he's looking up, he's saying, God, I love Israeli technology.
So like that. He's awesome.
And I'm sure the HR department at Facebook were shitting bricks at the time about having someone outside, but it was an interesting experience.
I think for Israelis, just to maybe add some more color to this, Laura, is it really ties well with what you just said, Scott. Israelis don't feel like they're in this different place. To us, it just feels normal.
I think just like earthquakes here, seriously, it's the same thing. No, seriously, people from the outside look at this and say, how do they dare living in a place where they know they're going to be major earthquakes, and it's just how do they not factor the risk? And it's not honestly, the risk in the startup are so big we don't even think about it, but so many things can happen. In fact, it's a miracle when the startups that it totally dwarfs any risk from the Iranians, and so and there is a history that even a war doesn't really make a difference. No Israeli company ever failed because there was a war here or a thing there. It's just like no Silicon Valley company ever failed because of an earthquake. And unless there was such an earthquake that would literally obliterate the Silicon Valley, or unless there was something in Israel that would literally obliterate the whole state, I think it's still a non-issue, and I think nobody sees it as an issue anymore.
I was concerned with the alarm test on Tuesday here.
That's because they're not local.
Exactly.
Or to your point, to create that mega outcome, right, to create that multi-billion-dollar company, do you think that can be done just by staying in Israel, or do you think you have to go, a company will need to come to the Valley, or New York, or Boston, or somewhere else to create that mega outcome?
I think it's very difficult to generalize in terms of black and white, but I do think that it is easier. It's hard for me to quantify the word, but I think it's easier to do it from here. Now, because you have an additional set of challenges when you fall from the market. And I do think that there are cases, very few, but there are cases, I think probably Checkpoint is the best example of a company that remained headquartered in Israel. But of course they had U.S. presence. Of course they had probably most of the workforces out. I don't know for a fact, but I'm imagining that most of the workforce, and certainly most of the workforce, if you take out the engineers, so most of the anything other than engineering is out of Israel, and they've created a mega outcome. And there are, but there are not many examples like this. I think it is.
I think it's changed. I mean, look at Wix, headquartered in Israel,
But
Conduit.
600 million, but I don't count these as a mega outcome.
No, but still, you do have hundreds of millions in revenue. You do have more than $1 billion in valuation. You have a company that is market leader and
one?
dominating. Wix.
700 million.
Depending on
this
which
is-
day you look at
No,
the.
no, 720.
Oh,
It's not a mega outcome.
the point is,
It's not the mega outcome in the way people hear things. Think about mega outcome.
I think it's
I know
a major
we're very,
change in Israel. No, it's a major change in before, right? Your
No,
actual.
I agree that things are changing. I do agree with them, and I think there are more and more examples. In fact, I think
and
that
they're
the future.
headquartered from Israel, which
No,
I
no,
think
they
is
are
a big
headquartered
change.
from Israel, and I think there's a list I can think of 5 or 10 companies that are not billion-dollar companies yet that have a real shot, actually, from Israel. So I think things are changing. But my point is that and it would be wishful. My point is that there's still a gap. I believe personally that there's still going to be, even 5 years from now, even 10 years from now, there's still going to be a gap between
Because of the closeness to the market, right?
because the market, not just the market, the whole ecosystem, the whole ecosystem. The talent, the top talent in every field. This is the potential partners, the customer. It's,
But I wonder if that's the case. I mean, if you look now with China as a target market, many times the U.S. would be at a disadvantage. if you no longer assume that the U.S. is the primary target market.
I think China is also a place, and Brett knows about it, and other people know about it much more than I do. China is also a place when you can expect, and you're already seeing mega outcomes. So I think, but that doesn't mean that Israel is better positioned to generate a mega outcome in China than a Chinese company, for example.
If you look at your portfolio, you mentioned 50% of your companies are in Israel. Do you see when you're investing in this company mega outcomes in your portfolio?
So,
What would be the characteristics that you see?
My perspective is there are certain segments that I think Israeli companies are uniquely positioned to dominate it. I think in areas of security, I feel like half the companies we invest in security in Israel are really just creating the antidote for all the stuff they did in the 8200 unit. So, the military did all these things, and now they're creating the corporate response
Not
for some of these
just the military.
capabilities.
I think they continue to do it out of the military also.
Yeah, no, yeah, absolutely.
But it's
So
different
I
companies,
do
though.
think
Different
I think
companies.
you're going to see a few mega deals come out of cyber. I just, given the global threat that exists for what's going on, nobody has, I think, a better position to go after that technology than Israel. I also think other industries like agriculture, where places like Israel have had to be incredibly creative about how to increase yields, how to do genetic sequencing of different types of crops. I think that need to be able to provide that level of efficacy around the world is they're better positioned to deal with that problem than we are here in the U.S. So I do think that there'll be sectors, just by virtue of the unique situation that Israel has been dealt, that Israel will be in a better position to create the next generation of dominant companies. And we believe that enough that we're investing a lot of capital behind it.
I agree with Scott. I think another example of actually a recent mega outcome is Mobileye, which is an $8 billion market cap company, and it's headquartered out of Israel. I think that the mega outcomes out of Israel are more likely to be deep technology companies, as opposed to user experience. And I love Wix, I really do, and the friends of mine, etc.
Oh,
Wix is a company that
I don't own a single share there, so it's fine.
No, I know, I
I'm
know.
not insulted.
Wix is a very, very nice outcome. They raised, 100, 150. They're now worth 700. It's a good outcome. It's a very good outcome. It's not the mega outcome that I think.
My point was again.
And I think it's correlated to the fact that they're doing something. They're
Odd
doing
couple.
Making
something
progress.
that that there is it's not a Mobileye and it's not even Checkpoint in terms of the depth of the technology. I do think it's correlated. And again, it's hard to say in black and white. I think it's possible that there will be a mega outcome similar to Wix also, or maybe Wix will become a mega outcome. But I think it's more likely to be something that has a very strong gut.
But I think the point is interesting even from a macro perspective. I think as an investor, trying to predict non-technology companies, things that are effectively have or either social or whatever, there's such an inherent risk of it's like trying to predict the next major song. I think where you're looking at pure technology investing, where you're investing dollars to determine whether or not the technology is capable of working. But if it works, it's a very clear path to be able to leverage that technology. So I do believe, at least our investing hypothesis there is we do invest in fundamental technology. We're not asking companies to be close to a social network. We're looking for things that are close to the bare metal of what's required in an industry to make change. The 100x, the 1000x change that's required to get the multi-billion-dollar type of outcome, the disruptive technology.
I think there's a basic assumption of what are the target markets moving forward. And there are certain disadvantages that are being built in the US. So for example, if you look at Bitcoin as a market, the regulatory environment in the US puts it for the first time, in my mind, at a disadvantage at applying a technology that is a fundamental shift in finance, in one of the largest industries ever. And it's because of the structure of the U.S. is such where you have the money laundering thinking, of course it's a currency, we need to monitor that, but you have IRS saying, no, of course it's an asset, and others saying, no, it's a commodity. So there's an inherent structure there where that likely won't be the target market, but a country with strong cipher background, strong entrepreneur background, and not attached to any of the blocks, right, the US dollar or the euro, that will be at an advantage. Now, whether Israel will take the advantage and actually pursue, The point is that by the target market, new kind of companies will happen. I think Israel is in a unique position to take advantage of it. So, and then build big companies. I agree with the basic technology requirement.
So if
Right,
you had identical companies both trying to disrupt, let's say Craigslist, one in Israel, one here, and there's like a 2x valuation gap. The Israeli one is half the valuation. Identical teams,
Yeah.
identical
Actually, that
products.
makes sense.
Would you invest in the Israeli one?
Not sure, and I don't think that you can quantify it in the 2x. But for example, if it's a team
For same
that
valuation, would you invest?
probably not.
You invest.
It depends on who is the team, really. It's
Exact same
because exact same team.
Everything is exactly the same.
Then
except
probably
one is
the
in
U.S.
value,
If it's
one is-
exactly the same valuation, U.S.
Yeah.
It's closer to the target market in that case.
So I think that to your point earlier, let's say that the valuation is like half in Israel. The question is like, what's gonna so closing the gap needs to
But
close
again,
the gap with the outcome. So how do you
But
close
I think
the outcome gap? on
I think the
Israeli
question is the way you're phrasing it is not the way that we would think about it. I mean, when we look at a deal, you never see equivalency in deals, but we're looking at the capability of the team to execute. And when you look at that, you're looking at a number of things. You're looking at technical capabilities. You're looking at what are the requirements for that business to be successful. And if it's a Craigslist, for example, where you're going after a U.S.-dominated market, where there are inherent advantages to being close to that market, then the tie would go to that company. We're not, but I wouldn't say we're ever making the decision based on valuation. We're always making the decision based on other, requirements or
Take gambling, right? And something that none of us likes in Israel, but Israel basically dominates that market. And it's because, again, of the target market. A U.S. company is at an inherent disadvantage at executing in that market, for better or worse.
They have morality, is that it?
By the way, I admire some of what 888 has been able to do. I mean, they have built servers with absolute logic as to optimizing for tax and legal and regulation, as which server executes that transaction. It's
They have
an
the best
amazing
payment
infrastructure.
system or payment and
Yeah,
collection system.
it's crazy.
It's amazing.
But
Plus we love
it does
the-
mean that the target market determines who is at advantage and who is at a disadvantage at executing on that strategy.
I'll give you just one interesting example. The company that acquired my last company is a large Asian conglomerate. They bought Viber a number of months before, and yeah, I mean, just a tremendous growth story. What's been fascinating is one of the key success factors they had was, they're one of the primary communication mediums in Myanmar, and the government is actively trying to suppress their ability to communicate, and you've got a bunch of people who are experts at defeating the countermeasures that everyone else is taking. So they are in many ways uniquely positioned to be able to grow that business in the places where they're getting, where there's great opportunity. They're not dominant in the U.S., but if you look at many of the countries in the developing world, they are one of the dominant forms of communication that occur, and that's fascinating. Again, they were uniquely positioned to address that issue differently than we might see teams here.
I wonder whether WhatsApp could have been born in any other country the same way.
Yeah.
Especially with the number of subscribers outside the U.S.
Yeah.
What about the cost of building a company in the US compared to this one? I mean, here it became absurd to build a company with running after talents, trying to recruit talent. And in Israel, it's much, you can find those engineers much easily than here. So how do you see the difference?
Well, I mean, it's a complex question in the sense that one of the things that technology has done is it's democratized both the speed and cost of creating new capabilities. So it used to be, 10 years ago, we might look at a deal that was primarily B2B or enterprise, and there was a minimum commitment of what was required in terms of capital to get that business built, a minimum commitment in terms of number of people. We're now seeing with cloud and with some of the new development architectures that small teams can be incredibly productive in terms of what they create. Now, that doesn't mean that there's not an advantage to having companies that are able to, bifurcate what they do from a development perspective. The company I built had half of the team based in Odessa, Ukraine, and while there was an advantage for cost, the reality was we were an algorithmic company. We needed mathematicians. It just so happened that economy was generating a huge number of people that had advanced degrees in math that were very capable of doing what we needed. So there was a flight to quality, not a flight to cost. this cost was a derivative advantage from that.
You guys compared before valuation, and I'm thinking, if you can have a talent here and it's cost you much more, and the chase after a talent here will take you much longer, then you can compare. Then it's not a matter of valuation. It's
Yeah,
a
but
matter
it
of
doesn't-
cost of
there's no. Now with the dollar, the gap widened again, but outside of the dollar change, I think costs are fairly similar. No, the availability.
Also,
The availability is high.
how easy it becomes to find talent
For
to bring
whom?
them. And it looks to me in the engineering side that Israel has much more warfare, much easier.
For the question, first of all, I think we all agree that it's not a matter of, and I think you would agree too, it's not a matter of cost. It's a matter of access to the very unique talent, the rock stars. And I think that, and I wouldn't tie it to the evaluation question. I think that you want to go where you have a competitive advantage, and this is true in general in life, for everything, in business and outside of business, and it's true for engineering talent as well. So, if I happen to be, which I'm not, but if I happen to be from Shmone Matayim, and I know and I know how to get the best people in Israel. I have access. I can get them into my company, and I know no one here. I don't have a network here. I should build my engineering center in Israel, irrespective of the cost. Even if they cost twice as much, it doesn't matter because I have a competitive advantage in Israel, which I don't have here. If I went to, Stanford, and I'm networked into the best rockstar engineers. I worked for Google in engineering or for LinkedIn. I have this access on Facebook. I have this access here. I should build it here. Generally speaking, there is a huge advantage in having the team, especially when the company is small in one place. But this huge advantage is offset by even a bigger advantage of getting great people, because the one rock star is worth not 50% more than a good engineer. They're worth 20 times, right? So I think for each company it's different, but basically the main criterion should be, where do I, as company X, have the access to the best talent? Any difference? It may be in Poland if I happen to have good connections in Poland.
I mean, it's just, sorry.
No.
So, again, this is speaking from personal experience, but the types of people that you're going after, particularly in the Valley. The Valley is a melting pot of some of the most talented people in the world. They're attracted to the capital. They're attracted to the opportunity. Unique opportunities, amazing opportunities that can challenge an engineer. When you can sit down with an engineer and say, we're going to give you access to a data set that is historic in the sense that it's never been tapped into before, and there's new art that can be created. Those types of opportunities, combined with the right capital, will attract the world-class talent. They're not the ones that want to live in Google or live in Facebook. They want to be the first one to do it. That's the essence of what we're trying to create, is the intersection of money, opportunity, and the world-class talent to make it happen. That's the DNA required for this thing to work. So the calculus of it is slightly different than just looking at the cost.
Yeah, the interesting thing, one of the problems in Israel has been historically the signal-to-noise ratio is still pretty similar to here, but the problem is that the noise is a lot of time Israelis trying to build a company that should be built here, right? So a lot of the noise of yet another company that with no advantage of being done from Israel. While there's a company in Israel called Windward. They have a very unique data set. They track all ships in the world, and I was very surprised to see there's no competition because people here didn't care much about that data set, while people coming from the Navy in Israel, it actually made a lot of sense for them. Okay, yeah, we need to track ships. And initially they did for Homeland Security. Now you can predict what's going to be the oil supply in Japan in 6 days, which is very different than the original Homeland Security. But the genome of building a company of that kind was not here. And it made sense to do it outside of here because companies like that sell to Uganda and sell to Vietnam and sell. The target markets are ones that the U.S. don't have an inherent advantage in. So unique data set, strong talent, and then target market, which is not necessarily the number one economy in the world. And that kind of the dichotomy between what should be built in Israel, regardless of cost per engineer.
It's all a question of competitive advantage. We're talking as if there is a set of Israeli companies and there's a set of U.S. companies. But the truth is that not all U.S. companies are created equal. Not all Israeli companies are created equal. So if you don't have a competitive advantage, even if you're in the Silicon Valley, it's probably not a great investment. You probably shouldn't do it. So I think we should all, as companies and as individuals, look for where we have a competitive advantage, where we actually have an edge, and that's typically a better, a good strategy, a better strategy to increase your chance of success. The other strategy is to be lucky, which works even better. But it's between that and it's between being good and being lucky, and lucky is better. Yeah.
Focusing on the
What's that?
Focusing on
Absolutely,
Shabbat.
lucky is better.
You mentioned China earlier. Are you finding Israeli companies, certain ones, any examples in your portfolios, or you see that are expanding in China before they go to the U.S.? Or what would be those companies
So-
or areas? Or?
First, there is a phenomena that is also happening here. China is trying to take over the world, right, in many ways. And part of the way to do that is by money inflow and technology outflow. So I'm pretty sure you don't want to mention names, but there's a big Chinese company that went to Israel, and instead of buying companies, they indemnify top engineer, and they gave them $200,000 salary a month in order to steal the IP, basically. In order to, okay, this is our dev center, let's bring 50 people, make sure to get the right people, and let's export that technology back to China. And so, and that's an actual case that was going on there. But there are also Chinese investors going into venture capital. I think latest fund closes by Carmel and Tango had a significant Chinese participation. So you see a lot of money inflow, which makes sense because this is what you're seeing here as well. The technology outflow is interesting. You see that, and you see them also in many of the customers outside the U.S. is actual countries where some Chinese companies are operating and then buying technology in order to do better operations. So you see that as well as them becoming integrators and service providers to countries outside the U.S. and Israeli companies are significant technology suppliers to such. So you do see that a lot.
Sure, this one, do you see more activity in India now? There's
Personally, no.
one example from last week,
Yes.
I think, there was like Zomato, Indian company bought a Yelp competitor. They're already competing in 6 different countries. They raised money at $600 million.
I can't say I've seen in outside of EdTech, there was an Indian company that bought a ad marketplace, Israeli one. But outside of that, I haven't seen them active in Israel almost at all.
You've got, I think India, if you were to pick an area of the world that's on the cusp of exploding, it's got to be India. It's one of the largest democratic economies in the world.
They speak English.
They speak English. We're sending a team to India in a month to go sit and meet and talk and learn. If you look at Flipkart and some of the other companies that are there, the work they're doing, these companies will rival the size of people like Amazon shortly. They'll do what Alibaba did in the Indian economy. So I think it's a fascinating market to look at right now. But drawing back to your question about China, as a non-domestic investor in those markets, particularly in the early stage of a market, to be successful in China, for example, you couldn't just take dollars from the outside and invest them in China. What you had to find was a trusted partner that you could work with that had the connections and the domain expertise and understood the nuances of the market in order to be successful. That was sort of the first stage. It's matured now. Now you're seeing a huge outflow of cash from Chinese companies. And if you look at Alibaba and the number of investments that they've made or what Baidu has done, they're really looking to expand the purview of what they do. And they're happy to invest in these companies with the hope that some aspect of that model is transportable back to their market and they can offer that to these portfolio companies. I haven't seen it happen in a big way. And then I would say the other side is it's one of the largest economies that we can sell into. So we're seeing portfolio companies now, particularly we have a sensor company right now that just got an order from a partner, from a distribution channel in China. That single order is bigger than anything they've done in the past 18 months, and it's a relatively small order for that channel. The scale is just different than what we're used to seeing. So we're still trying to figure this out, but it's an incredibly exciting, where there's that contrarian aspect and that uncomfortable feel, there's opportunity, and
I'm
I think
interested
that's the stage we're at.
I'm interested in what you think, because Brett, some of you might know, but probably not everyone. Brett actually backed a small company in China maybe 7-8 years ago called Alibaba in a big way, which turned into a huge outcome, obviously, and lived there also in Hong Kong, right? So, what's your take?
Are you part of GGV?
I'm at General Atlantic, so I know GGV quite well, and actually that was one of the ways we got involved. What I see is it's an amazing market. I mean, it is going to be the largest economy in the world. It already is on a PPP basis, and it's amazing. The scale is enormous. Many of those companies you mentioned, whether it be Alibaba, Tencent, Baidu, I mean, the best market, their competitive advantage is in that market. So a lot of the things they do outside that market, longer term, they clearly want to be successful outside of China, but is to bring the technology and know-how back into the market. I think it's a very challenging market to get in as an outsider, and that's pretty obvious, as you can see. A lot of U.S. companies, all the internet companies, have not been successful other than Yahoo, who made a large investment, a much larger investment than we made in that market. But I think if it can be accessed through the right channels, it's going to be, it's going to make companies. I think the most interesting thing I see from a China perspective as it relates to Israel is, where is their capital be invested in basic innovation? I was going to ask a question about Better Place and your thoughts on that. But if you look at what country in the world can absorb that kind of scale of investment or loss, it's probably China. And they have a surplus, not a deficit. They have tremendous amounts of resources, tremendous amounts of talent. The next level of innovation, I think, over the next, in basic areas, over the next 20, 30, 50 years is going to be probably from China, because they have a risky culture. They're not like Japan, right? So they have a young population that's risk-taking. They have a government that knows that its existence is based on economic prosperity and development for all. And they want to, reinvent many industries. They have lots of problems, right? They have climate issues and population control issues and all kinds of things. So if you look at the experiments that they will be doing, and the scale of those experiments are just going to be mind-blowing in many respects. And to the point I said earlier, they have the capital to do it. So everything they're doing in Israel is incredibly smart. From buying Tenuva, right, which helps them with all sorts of kind of expertise on agriculture and dairy. They have partnerships with companies like Netafim. And then you look at, from just a technology perspective, investing in some of the VC firms, investing in some of the startups. I mean, they're going to be an amazing force in that respect. So, I mean, I think India is wonderful. Actually, I'm supposed to go to India, and I've gone multiple times. We have offices in Mumbai. I mean, quite frankly, for me, it's Silicon Valley and China. I mean, that's all that really matters. I mean, India is a fun market. I mean, we have very successful investments there, but China, Silicon Valley. That's kind of what matters.
Yasmin just is doing the.
Well, we're out of time. We went above and beyond what we can. Thank you to everyone. Thank you for coming. I have one request to add to my request before and how you could be helpful looking at the room. We need more women involved. You all know, you're all working in this industry. It's not very vast, but we'd like to make sure we invite all the women that are in this industry. So send them my way, please. Enjoy the desserts. Find Ed and ask him about it, ballet camp. And thank you.
So just to get this over
No.
with, my mother was a ballet teacher and she didn't have summer arrangement for me, so I was watching from the sidelines. But it's a great fact. Thank you.